We live at a time when there is much dissatisfaction with education among parents, teachers, and educators. Those who consider an alternative education consider homeschooling. However, some parents face logistical challenges with homeschooling. Other parents want something better, an academically superior alternative rather than the standard educational offering. Some parents are worried that certain topics will be forced onto young, innocent children. The main area of concern in the wider government school system is the sexualization of young children, which we are totally against. Other parents are looking for a more stress-free, bullying-free environment for their children. Then there are parents who are on international or student visas. For these parents, the price tag for schooling whilst on that visa is a big challenge. With no government funding available for those kids whose parents are on student visas, the school passes the total cost directly to the parents. Parents could invest well over 10,000 Australian dollars for 1 year of pre-primary for their one child. That's where we come in. As Coram Deo is completely privately funded without any government funding, the school is run independently of government requirements and interference. In Australia, all schools, including religious schools, which receive funding, are bound to use the government curriculums. Families at Coram Deo are registered as homeschoolers who do not have to abide by the national curriculum and only need to abide by the West Australian curriculum in broad strokes. Let me tell you about Coram Deo Classical Christian Micro School. Firstly, we call ourselves a micro school because we are small. We aim to cover K to 12 with classes of 12 to 15 students only. Classes are small in size so that we can provide individual attention to each student. At each lesson, the teacher is able to provide attention to every child. If a child is not managing, the teacher knows almost immediately. If a child needs to be extended, that can be done too. Additionally, classrooms are multi-age, so that we can provide teaching that is suited to the student for where they are at, not making assumptions based on their age. Students come to us at different levels. Our students are not placed in a class just because they are of a certain age. At our micro school, we seek to provide a Christ-centered education that looks at the spiritual and physical realms to nourish the soul of every student who we have the opportunity to reach. Christian education is about Proverbs 9:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. Our religious beliefs can be found in our statement of faith. Here's an extract from that document. Christian education develops the whole person to glorify God in every area of a whole life. Holistic education points us upward to God, while also relating everything in life to God. Education starts with anthropology, the doctrine of man. So Christian education starts with Adam and Eve reigning over the garden of nature, representing the Creator in His creation. Christian education has a critical role to play alongside the church and the home in passing on the biblical worldview to the next generation. We are about discipling children. Classical Christian education is a well-established way of teaching that differs from modern approaches. It looks beyond standardized testing, beyond the world of work, and looks to God in shaping education. Classical education was the norm for about 1,000 years, teaching children their godly heritage. Around 150 years ago, it transitioned to what is now called progressive education, teaching children to become better citizens of the new world economic order. What does Coram Deo mean? Our school is called Coram Deo, which in Latin is before the face of God. We are meant to live our lives being aware that God is with us, watching over us, rejoicing over us, His people. We are a private institution that is not government funded, allowing for greater curriculum flexibility. Let me give you a little bit of a history of private schooling in Australia. Post-World War II, with the migration of the Dutch, there arose a need for Christian schools. These migrants had experienced Christian education in Holland and desired the same kind of education for their children. So in the early 1960s, Christian schools without any government funding started around Australia. Then in the 1970s, Catholic education started working towards receiving government funding. Their argument was that they were doing the job of the education department and so should be paid for it. When they started receiving government funding, other schools, Christian schools, joined the bandwagon. The Christian school movement mushroomed, but where were the teachers going to come from? Teachers might be Christians, but that does not mean that they know how to teach Christianly. With government funding also came the obligation to use the curriculum. Over the years, more and more demands have been made on schools and teachers. How is classical education different to mainstream? Classical Christian education can be defined by its classical method. It's a model focused on the trivium, a Latin word meaning three roads, where all of the learning is broken down into three distinct but overlapping phases. These three stages are called the grammar, logic or didactic, and rhetoric stages. The motto of classical education of truth, beauty, and goodness are celebrated as those objective values that are essential for cultivating students as flourishing human beings. The pedagogy, that is the way the children are taught, is different at each stage, but still cultivating truth, beauty, and goodness. It's the use of methods according to the age of the child, with singing and chanting in the grammar stage. In the logic stage, there are more Socratic discussions and debate. Teenagers love to argue, don't they? So we teach them how to make a good and logical argument, and how important that is in the present climate. Then in the rhetoric stage, there are more presentations, both written and oral. The pedagogy balances contemporary material with the well-established material that has gone before it. There are various analogies for classical Christian education. Classical Christian education could be compared to a garden. There's the potential of growth from a seed. It is beautiful and tranquil. It invites contemplation, alone or with companions and friends. A garden requires care and cultivation. Weeding suggests that we are to teach and guide to eliminate vices. Classical Christian education could be compared to a cathedral. It has been built over generations. Your head goes up when you walk into a cathedral. The cathedral is large. It draws people together and it creates unity under the lordship of Christ. Classical Christian education could be compared to a grand table. Education can be compared as a feast. The table is where we find sustenance. This is a festive occasion where we can grow and learn together. A place to linger and have long, relaxed conversation. Who is at the table with you? Those who have gone before are mystically able to be present. Classical Christian education is like walking along a tried and proven path. Another way in which classical education is different to mainstream is in the use of technology. At the grammar stage, students do not require a device. Teachers, however, may use technology in teaching the students. In the latter stages of logic and rhetoric, for some courses, a device may be required. Our students write their answers, take notes using cursive. A question I often get asked is, why Latin? The study of Latin is an important facet of the classical curriculum. It trains the mind for orderly thinking and expression. It lays a firm foundation in the grammar and vocabulary of English, and nearly 80% of all English words derive from Latin. After all, Latin is considered a dead tongue because nowhere in the world is Latin spoken as a first language. Even if one never uses Latin after school, this particular discipline has many other benefits. The study of Latin, for instance, can easily go on to learn Italian, French, Spanish, even non-Romance languages can easily be picked up, thanks to a deeper grammatical understanding that the study of Latin ensures. Our Latin teacher had studied Latin as a homeschooler, even went on to Bible college and learned Greek and Hebrew. He found it easier to study Greek and Hebrew in comparison to some of his fellow students having studied Latin as a child and a teenager. Perhaps the greatest benefit of Latin, however, is that it trains the mind to think analytically and to pay attention to detail. Every sentence must be a carefully constructed part that fits together, if the end result is to be a thing of beauty. There are so many word endings in Latin, so many possibilities to make errors, that no progress can be made without a great deal of concentration and sense of pride in one's work. The memory is sharpened in Latin study, since not only vocabulary, but long lists of declensions and conjugations must be learned by rote. Latin as a school subject has been neglected on account of its apparent uselessness. We maintain that if it improves our cultural literacy and helps equip the mind with the skills outlined, Latin is a subject that should at least take equal place among other subjects. Learning in a classical Christian school is done in community. Micro schools are community friendly. The micro school can pull students back into their own neighborhood and create a hub for young and old around which to bond. Belonging to a community can in turn reduce discipline problems that may otherwise crop up out of a student's desire for attention. Martin Luther is a name often connected with the Protestant Reformation. In a sermon, Luther said the collection taken up in church was for specific people. I quote, "Firstly, they are for ministers who labor for your salvation, preach to you the precious treasure of the gospel, administer the sacraments, and visit you at great personal risk in the plague," which was the dreaded disease of the time. Secondly, the collection is for school teachers who train children to be good magistrates, judges, and ministers. End of quote. Luther was of the opinion that Christian schools should not only be focused on the spiritual realm, but must provide an education that served the world. Here, Luther again turned to the classical education of the ancient world. For many centuries, churches organized schools, educating children in the ways of the Lord. Coram Deo seeks to instill in the educational community that it cultivates an eternal love of learning and commitment to serving others, and a dedication in the pursuit of religious truth, moral goodness, and beauty, forged from historical models of biblical Christianity. Classical Christian education's mission is to shape the virtue and reason so that they will be in line with God's will. We believe that the chief end of education is to prepare students to worship and glorify God. As a consequence of our mission, we are also planting classical micro schools all over Perth by working with churches. We're working towards establishing micro schools in Balcatta, Fremantle, Bassendean, as well as continuing with the ones in Canning Vale and South Perth. To finish, let me reiterate that the goal of a classical Christian curriculum is to make biblically thinking, lifelong learners out of the students. The most frequent comment by parents has been, "I wish I had a classical education when I was growing up." We can't go back to the past and change history, but we can make a choice for the future and for our children. So contact us for more details. Check out the website, like our Facebook page. Thank you.